I would start from saying, we should reform the corporate tax code. There's a lot of things phasing in and out, a lot of inconsistent parts of it. I think we can afford to raise the rate, but at the same time, we can do things to make investment more attractive.
Raise the rate to what?
I would go to 25 or 28, but I think the tax base matters a lot too. I think I'd do expensing. I'd eliminate interest deductions. I'd clean up the international side. If you do that, you can actually make it more attractive to invest. At the same time, you raise more revenue with a higher rate.
That sounds way too reasonable, and that's not something that's going to get anybody on a campaign slogan, get them higher in the polls. So what do you think are the craziest of the ideas that come out?
I mean, what's the craziest? I mean, I think going back to a 35% rate doesn't make any sense. Our rate was way too high. It was much higher than everyone else's in the world. The business community was calling for a 25% rate. So I don't think it's crazy to do what the BRT themselves were asking for 2 years ago, but 35, that's too high.
Hey, Dan, I'm assuming you would be unhappy with raising the rate, but I would ask you about the deficit, and one of the issues being that we have not raised the type of revenue that was expected at all from the current tax plan that's not on offer, but that's on the books.
I don't think anybody was claiming it was going to raise revenue. It was projected in its first 9 years to lose $1.4 trillion. Surprisingly, I looked at the CBO's monthly data. The corporate tax revenue, remember, the rate went down by 40%. Revenue's only gone down by 8.7%. Now, there are things like deemed repatriation, so I'm not claiming there's a giant Laffer curve effect, but I think the data so far are fairly decent, and we're certainly getting some good economic numbers.
Dan, when you look at where we are in terms of jobs in America, and clearly we are in a better place than we have been in a very long time, how much do you attribute that to the tax cuts themselves?
There are all sorts of things that affect the economy: regulatory policy, monetary policy, trade policy, where, of course, Trump is causing havoc. But all that being said, I think it's good for America, good for our competitiveness to have a lower corporate tax rate. And by the way, I agree with Jason on things like expensing and getting rid of the interest deduction. One's a revenue cost, one's a revenue gainer. So you can do things within the confines of not having a big tax cut to make our system even better.
What do you say to that?
I think one thing, I'm glad Dan agreed with me. I think there's a lot of things on the tax base we can agree on. If you get that right, you can raise the rate, you can raise revenues, you can do it in an efficient manner. But one thing I disagree with, there was an awful lot of people saying this tax cut was going to pay for itself. That was a central talking point. That was a central argument, and it's just not true, and it's not happening. And
Jason, let me ask you this. This is Donald Trump on Twitter over the weekend. The Trump economy is setting records and has a long way to go up. However, if anyone but me takes over in 2020, and I know the competition very well, he writes in parentheses, there will be a market crash, the likes of which has not been seen before. Keep America great. Do you believe that?
No. I mean,
because
the stock market's done better under Democrats than Republicans. I don't.
Sure.
Do I think that's because of the Democrats? No. But do I think that's evidence that Democrats don't destroy the economy?
But let me ask you a separate
certainly.
question, which is, given these tax plans that are on the table, given some of the regulatory plans that are on the table, even if you just say that the transition to them will be complicated and messy, and you don't believe that CEOs would say, you know what? I'm going to sit on my hand assuming a Democrat is either looking like they're going to win or won. I'm going to sit on my hands for the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months as I see this play out. You could make the argument after the financial crisis, by the way, and the addition of Dodd-Frank. The banks, because they didn't know what was about to happen one way or the other, may have held back. You don't think that's
every
true?
time a Democrat's elected, you've had this same argument, and historically, you have faster GDP growth, faster investment growth, faster stock price increases under Democratic presidents. So, again, do I think that proves Democrats are way better on the economy? Probably not. There's all sorts of things going on. But the idea that they tank the economy, I think those data completely refute that notion.
I mean, you can go back to the early 90s, and in fact, there was a tax increase under Clinton early on, and people thought it was actually going to really kind of kill this young recovery, and it didn't quite happen that way.
Hey, Dan, in terms of tax rate, what do you think would be the right rate? He's talking about 25, 28%. Do you think it would tank the economy?
I don't think you tank the economy, but you might cause the economy, you probably would cause the economy to grow a little bit slower than it otherwise would. I mean, the key thing in economic policy, I mean, Jason's right, and of course politicians exaggerate. We're talking about what can we do to sort of marginally get the economy to grow faster. 0.2 of additional growth per year, if sustained, makes a big difference after 10 or 20 years. That's really what drives prosperity and living standards for people. So yes, I want government to be smaller, and I'm not being partisan about it. If you had a pro-market Democrat like Bill Clinton, I'd be pretty happy. I'm not sure we'd get good results, though, from Bernie Sanders.
Dan, what would happen if the capital gains rate was matched at 35% on the upper end? Put the corporate rate just aside for a moment. If you just said we're going to have one standard rate for everything at the high end.
Well, don't forget, it's not one standard rate, because things like dividend taxation and capital gains taxation, that's a double tax on income that's already been taxed at the corporate level. So now, would double taxation be a bad idea if all the rates were low? Well, then the cumulative rate might be okay. But you have to focus on how much we're taxing and what we're taxing. And Jason said this earlier about the tax base. I think one of the problems with our tax base is that we double and in some cases triple tax income that is saved and invested. And I think that's shooting yourself in the foot.
Okay. Jason, thank you for coming in.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Dan, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
When we